I am going to mention my father during this message. But my father will turn 85 next month. But 25 years ago, I was on a plane to attend his funeral. It's when he's saying, miracles can happen, silent prayers get answered. And I was already thinking about my dad. I just remember he was in a coma, and the neurosurgeon said, pull the plug. There's nothing left for this guy. But our family physician said, nah, the brain science, nobody knows. So unless you want to pull the plug, just wait. And after, I don't know if it was about a week, I was with him and some other people were with him, and I said, Dad, if you're aware of us, if you're conscious of us, like move something, move your toe. So they said, maybe he can move his toe. And he moved his toe. And I said, wow. And, yeah. Anyway, so he's back in some ways. But miracles can happen. God hears and answers prayers. So be encouraged. This is our third talk on Sabbath. Sabbath for me, as you have to listen to the series. But I said I resisted it. I said, no way. It's impossible. It's irrelevant. And I taught that as a pastor. But now I teach the opposite. I say, you know what? I'm talking to pastors, literally, all over the world, all the time. Nobody is practicing Sabbath. Not nobody. Very few pastors that I talk to. People will think I'm lazy. I have to be available. I've got so much to do. Well, after I was so busy in a large church with so much going on in Colombia, and I came to Uruguay, I chose it, but I spent years thinking, what in the world did I leave a big, important job to come to this forgotten, isolated spot that nobody even knows where it is? But actually coming here forced me to take a look at my own life and over time to make changes. It gave me the space to realize I needed a Sabbath. I'm busier. I'm not busier. I do more work for more people than I ever did in my life. But I take Fridays and I rest. I don't do, once in a while, somebody knows I'll send them an email or a text, but I keep a Sabbath day. And so does Lisa. And it's made us stronger, more effective. It's changed our life. So that's why I've been teaching about Sabbath. Today is Sabbath as resistance. We did Sabbath as rest, Sabbath as rhythm, and Sabbath as resistance. So by popular demand, I'm trying to get away from my notes, back to the way I used to preach in Colombia. But I'm still, since COVID, I started using notes, and now it's hard to relearn. But Sabbath as resistance is a concept that was popularized by a scholar named Walter Brueggemann. He wrote a book, Sabbath as Resistance, Saying No to the Culture of Now. So what is the culture of now? That's like this culture, this pressure that never lets up to achieve, perform, accomplish, do, and somehow prove our value to ourselves and the people around us. So in his book, Brueggemann argues that Sabbath is more than rest and rhythm. Those are the easy parts to understand, not easy to do. But to keep the Sabbath, he says, is to perform a radical act of resistance against the powerful pressures, the compulsion, the driving slavery of our need to perform and accomplish and achieve things and indulge. Sabbath as resistance is creating time and space in our week to recognize and affirm the life of God in us, that intrinsic value for just being. There is nothing you can do to earn God's approval. There is nothing else you can be doing that would make him love you more or love you less. That's an almost impossible concept for us to grasp. There is nothing you can do that would have God, make God love you more and say, finally, John, finally, you only preached 20 minutes. Finally, you visited such and such a person, like, whew, now God loves me. No, he loves you for who you are. And what you do is secondary. So his opinion is not based on how busy you are, his opinion of you, how busy you are, how much you're accomplishing. It's more about your availability, your commitment to being part of his family on his terms, not your own. And so creating a Sabbath rhythm is really hard. It really is. That's why we don't find anybody that does it. Like me, is that's the Old Testament. That's another time. That's like for fundamentalist people. No. I gave those arguments at my other talks. But it's really difficult to just step aside and rest. Lisa and I actually took like 1.5 years. I should be that practical and tell you. And it was so hard that I told Lisa, I said, look, why don't you just have your Sabbath? We'll have our Sabbath on different days. Because how can we both be in the same house having a Sabbath when we're so different? That's how distorted my thinking was, that when I had a day just to relax, rest, be thankful with my wife, and it just caused more anxiety and stress because she wanted me to help her in the garden or something, and I wanted to read a book. I don't know. So we said, let's take separate days until we both began to find a rhythm, especially me, to say, this is crazy. Let's get together on the same day. Let's learn to enjoy this space and this time together. So Sabbath is hard until you suddenly find out, as you try to practice, try to do it, try to make a start, that your heart's been realigned and you're finding it, that you're filled with gratitude and new faith and hope. So in part 1 of this series, I referenced Genesis, the Genesis story, the creation story, as the foundation of our understanding. So I want to just say again, Genesis chapter 2, verses 1-3 said, on the 7th day, God rested from all his work, and he blessed the 7th day, and he made it holy. A holy means separate, distinct, set apart for God. And so it's a God day. He designed the world with a rhythm of work, rest, work, rest, work, rest. And the 7th day was to stop, rest, delight, contemplate. Now, contemplate is one of the weird words that we say. Sit there and light a candle. I mean, all the pastors ask me that. So what, you want me to sit and light a candle and like read my Bible all day? Is that contemplate? Like contemplate what? I'm busy. I like to do something. Contemplate really means use your whole imagination. Use your senses. Feel, be. Look around, notice, observe. Be grateful. Read the scriptures and use your feelings, your senses. So, contemplate the presence of God means notice, where's he at work? So Sabbath was meant to be the most fun, fulfilling day. But usually when we mention Sabbath, you may think, oh, Sabbath, that's the best. But most people are thinking, that's kind of weird. Why are we talking about Sabbath? And I said, that's because our thinking has become distorted due to all these religious rules that were never meant to be. Now, the first one that wrote down the religious rules was Moses. So we talk about the law of Moses. And in Exodus chapter 20, 19 and 20 really is this fascinating narrative of how Moses was leading the people, the descendants of Abraham, out of slavery in Egypt. And there's this time when together the people of the children of Abraham, they called them, together with their friends and neighbors, many who came with them, agreed together. They made a covenant, a pact, like the Old Testament, the Old Covenant. They agreed together to honor God, follow his guidance, and learn to live their lives against the grain of, think about how the culture was then, and I wonder if it's like that now. Violent, people trafficking, child sacrificing, sexually indulgent, profane. That was the culture of the time. Now, the people of Israel, these Hebrew people, had a lot of wrong thinking and wrong living. And we've had this series before, but just to clarify, they call them the people of Israel because they were the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jacob's name was changed to Israel. And after that, instead of saying the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all the descendants, they started calling them the people of Israel. So they had been raised as slaves. So they have all this wrong thinking, this distorted ideas in their mind. They've lived under oppression in a foreign country, foreign culture, foreign language for more than 400 years. So they have some idea of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but is very distant and not relevant. Sound like today? The law of Moses was given by God for this moment in their history when they first tried to establish a shared identity, a shared faith, a shared hope, and a promised future. So they established this covenant, this pact. And at the very heart of it are the 10 best ways. In Godly Play, we talk about the 10 best ways. Now we call it the 10 Commandments. And actually, in Hebrew, it was like the 10 words. And so there were 3 words. The first 3 were about staying connected to God. Then there was a word about the Sabbath. Then there was a word about family. And then there were 5 words about living together in community. So I want to read Exodus chapter 20, not the whole list, but just the 4th commandment, verses 8 to 11. It's interesting, you might know this already, but the 4th commandment is explained, has the longest explanation. There's maybe 2 that are really long, and this is one of them. And so it's right at the heart of the teaching. It's the commandment that builds the bridge between God and the people and will help them to experience that their faith in God is actually relevant and real and is meant to help them trust their God for their daily needs and the life of their nation. So Exodus chapter 20, verse 8 and following. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the 7th day is a Sabbath to your Lord, to the Lord your God. On that day you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son, your daughter, your male or female servant, your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and the sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the 7th day. And therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath, and he made it holy. Now, if you're looking at it, look at it in your Bible. Just look at it because I just want you to see it. This is Moses' most famous moment near the beginning of the Exodus, this unprecedented Exodus out of Egypt. And in his primary moment and speech, he's talking about the 10 best ways to honor God and live in community. And right at the heart of it is the fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath. And so let's skip ahead in our imagination, our contemplation. Let's skip ahead through the whole book of Exodus, the whole book of Leviticus, the whole book of Numbers, Deuteronomy, the fifth book of Moses, Deuteronomy. It's kind of a weird name. I always like to explain it. Deuteronomy means the second law, and it comes from the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures. And so, between your Old and New Testament, there was history happening all over the world. And Alexander the Great had conquered the world, and everybody was speaking Greek. So you had all the kids of these Jewish people who spoke Hebrew that were studying Greek at school. And so they took the Hebrew scriptures, translated to Greek, called it the Septuagint, because they had 70 scholars, that's what the legend says, that worked on it. So the Septuagint. And they called the fifth book of the law Deuteronomy, the law again, because Moses gives 3 speeches. That's the book of Deuteronomy, 3 speeches. And in this speech, he is at the very end of his leadership life. They're his last words to the people. And so he reviews over what they've been through and what God has done. So in Deuteronomy chapter 5, the text restates the 10 commandments, the 10 best ways. And I want you to listen as I read the same thing read in Exodus from Deuteronomy chapter 5. It starts out the same, but it changes. So listen for the change. Observe the Deuteronomy 5:12. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. Here's the first change. So that your male and female servants may rest as you do. And don't make other people do things you're not doing yourself. That's part of it, right? Now, verse 15 comes a shift. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and therefore, that's why the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. There's 2 things. We thought it was just about the creation. God rested, so we should rest. But was it really a day? Or was it like an eternity? Or was it a billion years? Or what was it? But it was already established, and now it says because God knew some things he was going to accomplish, like the people coming out of slavery. And so that's why keeping the Sabbath is a remembrance that you are no longer slaves because of what God has done for you. So you can write this down. It's not in the notes, but 1 Peter 2, 9-12, he has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. I don't always quote all the Bible verses, but I've been studying the Bible my whole life, so when I'm talking to you, trust me, I can show you that this is our faith. I was recently speaking at a wedding, and a doctor came up to me afterwards, and retired man, and he said, "You quoted a poem, and it was so good, so I want to know where to find it." And I said, yeah, I had quoted, there's an ancient poem. And I read a few lines. I said, well, that's actually in the Bible. It's the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes. Oh, Ecclesiastes, he knew. He was a Catholic. He knew it as soon as I said it. And he said, well, why did you say an ancient poem? I said, well, I looked out at my audience, and I said, as soon as I tell this crowd that I'm quoting a Bible verse, I've lost them. So I told them it was an ancient poem, and they leaned in to hear. And he agreed. He said, yeah, that was the right thing. It's a tough crowd. Sabbath is creation and Exodus.
rest, rhythm, and remembrance. But scholar Walter Brueggemann goes deeper. Remembrance is nice, but Deuteronomy 5:15 is not about a nostalgic memory, but a vital resistance to the forces of darkness that enslave us and keep us from realizing God's purposes and experiencing His blessings in our lives. Now, if you know the story, you'll recall that when the people of Israel got anxious and angry in the desert, they asked to go back to Egypt. They preferred slavery to the hardship of taking responsibility for their own destiny and the well-being of their families and community. God, in His mercy, didn't let them go back into bondage, but they never made it to the promised land. Those people wandered in the desert until the generation of grumblers and doubters had been buried in the blowing sands. I wonder, what have you and I missed because we were complaining about the challenges instead of recognizing the mercy of God and His invitation to grow forward? Brueggemann says it's not enough to just remember. We must resist the forces inside and outside that would keep us from finding our purpose and fulfillment as God designed. So let's talk about the Sabbath as resistance. Sabbath resists the objectification of other people. How? Well, on Sabbath we turn to wonder. We can rejoice in God's mercy. And so we become aware of our own limitations, our own weaknesses. Gratefulness and silence build resistance against seeing other people as objects for us to verbally abuse and take advantage of. Now, Lisa suggests that I don't say verbally abuse, but isn't that what we do to each other so often? Time with God exposes our lust for control, power, achievement, and accumulation. Time with God also allows us the space to heal and discover our true value as part of His family. When we know who we are in relation to God, we can resist becoming objects under somebody else's lifeless stare. Now, Sabbath also resists a scarcity mindset. How? Well, a scarcity mindset is an anxious way of life that believes I'm only worth what I produce for myself. And because I'm limited, I will never have enough, and I will never be enough. Let me say that again. A scarcity mindset is an anxious way of life that believes I am only worth what I produce for myself. And because I'm limited, I will never have enough, I will never be enough. But on the Sabbath, when we practice the discipline of Sabbath, we learn to gratefully rest in the love of God, His provision for our lives, and His promises, which are always greater than our circumstances. Gratitude is a powerful antidote to anxiety. Sabbath resists ownership arrogance. Ownership arrogance is the misguided attitude that I am the source of my strength and well-being. I am in control. Now, self-confidence is a good thing when it comes from healthy self-awareness, but we need to stop working and recognize that the world will go on without us. We are not in control of anything, really. Micah 6:8 says the prophet, resist ownership arrogance. Micah didn't say resist ownership arrogance, but he said embrace justice, love mercy, and walk humbly before God. Now, Jesus told a parable. It's in Luke chapter 12, verse 16 to 20. And it goes like this. The land of a certain man yielded an abundant harvest. He had a great year, and he thought to himself, what should I do? I don't have enough place to store all my abundance of harvest. And so then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my old barns and I'll build bigger ones. And then I'll store all my surplus. And I'll say to myself, you have so much grain and abundance laid up for many years. Just take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. But then as Jesus told the parable, he said, God spoke to him and said, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. And then what will you get from all this that you've set aside for yourself? Part of the meaning of this parable is the timeless truth that all that we have has been given to us. No one makes it alone, and none of us can determine the length of our life. Now, my father, some years ago, had just filled the car with gas, and he was headed towards his in-laws with just a few more hours of driving to go. My mom was sitting in the seat there next to him, and as my dad popped the can of Coke that he just bought at the gas station, he pulled into traffic right in front of a truck, was hit by the truck, and the family and community were changed forever. Now, my father was 59, and I guess I've been thinking about that because I'm now 58. But my mom has cared for him for 25 years. He's alive, and she has literally never left his side. She has found happiness and fulfillment. But she told me, we were just entering the best years of our life together, and it was all taken away. And I'm reflecting, and I think sometimes we live the life we are given, and not always the life that we choose. So Sabbath resists the objectification of people, the scarcity mindset, the ownership arrogance. It also resists, gives us the roots to resist anxiety. When you have a rhythm of Sabbath that honors God as a creator, then you can remember that he powerfully intervened and intervenes in history to deliver his people out of darkness, out of slavery. When we understand that, we can rest from our weekly worries and fears and trusting in his promises. The promises that we've shared throughout the series, the one promise from Matthew 11:28-30 is a promise we've shared throughout this series, where Jesus said, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Jesus said, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. In the Sabbath space, a day to honor God's gifts to us, that is where we discover true rest, rhythm, and the strength to resist the chaotic culture around us and inside us. When times get hard, having that Sabbath gives us the space to remember the promises of God and restore our strength. And when times are good, the Sabbath gives us an opportunity to receive a surplus that can overflow to others and be there for us as well when the times get hard again. Now, in this series, I've only shared an introduction, but hopefully it's a compelling invitation. The Sabbath is not a religious holiday. It's not just a day off to pursue our own self-interest. It's an invitation to enter into a weekly rhythm of sacred space where time and eternity meet, where God always walks in the garden and he delivers his people from evil. To keep the Sabbath is a radical act of resistance against the powerful pressures, compulsions, and driving slavery of our society, which values self-reliance, production, accomplishment, knowing, achieving, indulgence. And in our life, God calls us to be, to loving him, to just be who we are. And I pray that you'll pursue the discipline of Sabbath, that you'll enter in and begin where you can, and that you'll start to make that a priority for your path forward in connecting with God and being all who you were made to be. Let's pray as we close.